Good evening. You're watching Visions, and I'm Sally Dusting-Laird. And our guests tonight are former Liberal Prime Minister Malcolm Fraser and Julian Burnside QC from the Justice Project. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Mr Fraser, can you give us a bit of background about the Justice Project?
The Justice Project, and I'm one of the supporters, one of the members, as Julian is, was founded by a group of like-minded people who are concerned that actions largely of the federal government which were eroding the basic rights that should apply to all people. We were very concerned that children in detention, children in jails, the way refugees generally were being treated, and the way the laws were being changed to diminish access to a proper judicial process and to give the government more and more executive power. Well, the Justice Project was founded really to fight an initial set of circumstances. It decided there's a continuing need, continuing concern, because there are many aspects of the government's legislation that we believe is very wrong in a democratic society.
Mr Burnside, could I ask you, let's talk about the latest amendments to the refugee system in Australia, currently debated in federal parliament.
Yeah, the latest proposal would mean that anyone who comes to Australia without authority and gets to the mainland will be taken against their will to Nauru, most likely, or possibly Manus Island in Papua New Guinea, most likely Nauru. There it is said they will be processed, quote unquote. The problem is that the processing will not be processing of a visa application. It will be processing them to see whether they conform to the UN Convention test of refugee status. If they're assessed as refugees by officers of the Department of Immigration, they will then be offered around the world to other countries who might be willing to take them off Australia's hands. The point of this, of course, is that people who have committed no offence by seeking asylum in Australia will be taken to a third country where they will have no access to any legal system in the world. They will have no mode of redress for incorrect decisions made by officers of the Australian Immigration Department. Their fate will be entirely in the hands of those officers who have to decide whether or not these people are refugees. And then, if they're assessed as refugees, they may have to wait months or years before Australia can find another country willing to take them. Now, this means, in substance, a complete abdication of our obligations under the Refugees Convention.
Mr Burnside, you've been to some of these detention centres. What are the conditions like? Which detention centres did you go to, first of all, and what did you see there?
Well, I've been to the Maribyrnong Detention Centre many times, and Baxter and the Perth Detention Centre, and I've been to Nauru recently, after 3 failed attempts to get there when the government wouldn't let me go. Oddly, Baxter is the newest and the most technologically advanced, but it's also the grimmest. It is truly a jail. It is more alarming, I think, even than Port Phillip Prison, which is a maximum security prison in Melbourne. It is right out in the South Australian desert, 5 hours drive from Adelaide, and it's really startling. You get there, and if you stand at the gates of Baxter Detention Centre and face east, what you see is a perfect Fred Williams landscape. If you turn and face west, you see, almost as far as you can see from north to south, is this dazzling, shiny silver fence, which, as it happens, is a 9,000 volt electric fence, described on the ground plans as a courtesy fence. Nice bit of doublespeak. And then there's 20 metres of no man's land and another tall, glittering, shiny, silvery fence. And beyond that, a series of compounds, all made out of corrugated iron, no windows, each surrounding an area of land. They're quite big, so that the people inside can go into the open area in the compound and look up and see the sky, but they cannot see outside the centre. And a person visiting the centre will not see a human being from the outside. It takes you about 20 minutes to pass through all the security checks to get in, and then you're only allowed to see people you've identified as your the people you want to visit in the visitor centre.
The children in the detention centres, I think we're all concerned about that. Do they talk to you? What do you observe? What's their behaviour like?
It varies enormously. The Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission in Australia did a 2-year survey of children in detention. They published their report in 2003. They reported that after 6 months, many children had at least one psychiatric disorder. After 12 months, every child in detention had at least one psychiatric disorder. And after 18 months, most children had 2 or more psychiatric disorders. I think my worst memory from all of this is an 11-year-old child from Iran who was identified by the authorities as being at severe risk. She'd stopped grooming herself, she'd stopped caring for herself. She, like many pre-pubescent children, she was wetting her pants every day in detention because of the stress. But one night in Maribyrnong Detention Centre, when her mother and father and sister were off having dinner, she got a sheet and hanged herself in Maribyrnong in May of 2002. An innocent child. She was only 11 and didn't know how to tie the knot properly, so she was still strangling when they came back to the room. And she then swallowed shampoo because she'd seen grown-ups kill themselves that way in Woomera. Now, these are toxic environments for children. These things should never be allowed to happen to children. But the Heriock report said that the treatment of children in Australia's detention centres, taken together, amounted to systematic child abuse.
A bit over a year ago, a number of largely backbenchers persuaded the Prime Minister to take children out of detention centres. And children, their mothers, I'm not sure about their fathers, were then going to be in community centres, which are much more open. But the current proposals before the Parliament would go back on that promise, and children and mothers, entire families, would again be in detention centres, but out of sight. The government would hope out of mind, as Julian mentioned, probably on Nauru, where it would be very, very hard for people to get at them, almost impossible for the press to go. So, somebody who used to work in the government told me that he'd been to Nauru, and that if you'd been able to put on Australia's television screens the actual circumstances in which people were then detained, he believed that overwhelmingly Australians would be revolted at what they'd seen.
There's a twist to that. People in the housing projects in Australia, the accommodation projects outside the Baxter Detention Centre.
You're watching Visions. I'm Sally Dusting-Laird, and we'll be back after this break.